Before we get started here, for anyone who is new to Congressman Amash's town halls, once I hand him the mic, he'll go ahead and give an introduction for a few minutes, talk about a few of the things happening lately in Congress and some of the things he's working on, and then he will just take it for a question and answer. When he does that, just raise your hand. He will try to get to as many people as he can. Obviously, he can't answer every question as soon as we start, but he will try to answer as many questions as we can get to. Please make sure if you do have cell phones that the ringer is off, and then that when other people are asking questions, try to be quiet enough to make sure that they have the opportunity to have their question heard and then answered by the congressman. And without any further ado, here's Rep. Amash.
Thanks, Ben. And before we get started, I just want to mention that our office is available to help you with any of your federal concerns. If you're a veteran who needs help with some benefits, if you have immigration issues, if you have Social Security or Medicare concerns, you can contact our office and we'll do our best to help you. You know, a lot of people, when they think about their member of Congress, they think about what's going on in DC and the legislative work. But we're also here to help in the community to provide assistance if there's something going wrong with your interaction with the federal government. In fact, we've done things like veterans who haven't received the medals or awards that they deserve. We've been able to help sometimes help them get those awards. So there are things like that where our office can help. So please feel free to contact us to help you with that if we can assist. I want to say that I'm really proud to represent this community. We've held a number of town halls. I'm going to keep holding town halls. And the people have been very respectful, very civil. We've had good conversations. And I think that that's how these town halls need to go, that we try to listen to each other, and I do my best to learn from your suggestions, and that's my job as a representative, to come here and learn from my constituents about their concerns and about their issues so that I can do a better job as a representative. And it also gives me an opportunity to explain some of the work that I'm involved in over in Washington, D.C. So if we can keep it as a civil discourse, I think we can accomplish a lot more, and that's been the case so far in my town halls for the most part. So not every time, but so I want to thank you for that. Let me give you a brief update on some of the things we've been doing in DC, and then I'll open it up for Q&A, and you can ask me about anything you'd like. So. One of the bills we voted on recently was an omnibus appropriations bill, and that was a bill that spent over $1.1 trillion, and it was classic Washington, D.C. in how it was developed, where they threw together a bill with over 1,000 pages at the last second, and they said, here it is, it's $1.16 trillion, it's over 1,000 pages. You got a couple days to look at it, and then we're going to have a vote. And that's not the way it's supposed to work. The appropriations process is supposed to take quite a while. We're supposed to go through 12 separate appropriations bills. We're supposed to offer amendments to these bills so we can change them. And then after a thorough debate, we vote on them one at a time so we can separate them out so that we can vote on the veterans bill separately from, say, an agriculture bill. We can vote things separately, and people at home then can see how we're voting on these different items. Instead, what happens time and again is when we reach a deadline where we have to pass more spending to keep parts of government open, they either pass a continuing resolution, or sometimes called a CR, you might hear that sometimes in the news, and that just keeps spending going at the same level for a little bit longer. And then at some point they'll pass, possibly they'll pass an omnibus appropriations bill, which is what we passed recently, and that just is throwing a bunch of appropriations bills essentially together and having just one up or down vote with no ability to change it no ability to amend it, and very little time to read it, frankly. So I voted no on that bill, which is the responsible thing to do. I don't think we should ever be held hostage by our leadership team that way, where they say you either vote for this or the government shuts down. I think that we should go through the process in an orderly fashion. There's plenty of time to work on it. This idea that we have to do it at the last second is wrong, because they know of these deadlines months in advance, and they often don't bring up the bill until the last few days. And we had that where for weeks and weeks we were there and we weren't working on it, and then all of a sudden here's the spending bill. So I don't support that kind of process, and I hope and expect that people at home don't support that kind of process either. So let me talk a little bit about the health care bill, and this is probably the topic that ends up being most controversial. I voted yes on the revised version of the health care bill. I believe that it is marginally better than the current system, marginally, but only by the slightest bit. The earlier version, I think, would have been actually worse than the current system, because the earlier version made some changes right before the vote. They made some changes to the bill right before the vote that would have been particularly harmful to people who are poor and vulnerable. And in the newer version, they did address some of those concerns. They fixed it and made it better. Now, at the federal level, I'm not talking about state level, because you may have heard in the news there's the possibility of state waivers. So let me talk first about what the bill itself does at the federal level. At the federal level, it does not change any of the ACA's requirements on guaranteed issue, on essential health benefits, or community rating at the federal level. Nothing changes. It simply uses the ACA's provisions. So it is the same, doesn't change those. So you can't be denied coverage, you can't be charged more if you have a pre-existing condition, you have the same health plans because they can't change the essential health benefits at the federal level. Now, on the state level, there is the possibility for states to waive parts of the regulations. But there's been a lot of misinformation out there about how this works. The states can waive essential health benefits. In other words, they can decide what is the minimum coverage requirement in insurance plans. So if you have a plan, they can decide that instead of offering 4 plans, now they can offer 10 plans or 15 plans, and they can offer different things in each plan. So they're allowed to offer more plans than before with more variety. So when it comes to community rating, this is the ability to charge people more if they have a pre-existing condition or based on their health status. They are still prohibited from doing that at the state level unless there is a lapse in coverage of more than 62 days. So the person would have to not obtain insurance within 62 days of losing insurance. But it's important to remember that if a person loses insurance, this is even if a state, let's say a state waives everything. If a person loses his or her insurance coverage and then goes back to purchase insurance within 62 days, that person cannot be charged more, no matter what pre-existing condition they have, cannot be charged more than a healthy person, and cannot be denied coverage. So as long as they go to purchase insurance within 62 days, they cannot be charged more and they cannot be denied coverage. So it will cover their pre-existing condition just the same as before. Will not change. Now, if there is a lapse of coverage, so the person decided not to get insured within 62 days at the same rate as everyone else, then a state may be allowed to charge them more for up to 1 year If the state has opted into that, and if the state has set up a separate program to help people with pre-existing conditions. So they have to set up a separate program, they have to opt into it. And they can't charge them more unless it's in lieu of a 30% penalty that they would otherwise pay. So just like under the ACA, where we have the individual mandate, where if you don't get coverage, you pay a penalty. Under this new bill, if you don't have coverage, if you let your coverage lapse for more than 62 days, you must pay a 30% penalty, a 30% on your premium penalty for up to 1 year, just 1 year. Not beyond that, but for 1 year, because it's considered a penalty. So a state could decide, if instead of having the 30% penalty, they could decide that as a penalty for a lapse of coverage, they will charge the person more or less based on health status for up to 1 year. But after 1 year, assuming that person gets coverage, after 1 year, their rates again drop down to be the same as someone who does not have the pre-existing condition. So it is not a permanent penalty, it is for 1 year. It's treated as just a 1 year penalty. For the most part, this bill is a restructuring of the ACA. It is not a massive rewrite of the ACA. It is certainly not a repeal of the ACA.
What about
So cost to seniors under the bill, under the ACA they can be charged 3 to 1, so at a rate of 3 times higher than someone who is young. That's under the ACA. Under this bill, it's 5 to 1, so they can be charged up to 5 times more. So that is a change. That's at the federal level. Yes, that is a change. Absolutely. That's absolutely a change. But they also receive tax credits and other things to compensate for the cost. So the question is, when it goes to the Senate, will those tax credits be increased or decreased? And there's been talk of increasing those tax credits, and there's been other changes that have been suggested. But the bottom line is, the bill basically maintains the structure of the ACA. It is not a repeal. It's a repeal of about fewer than 10% of the provisions. My staff estimated it's about 6 to 7% of the provisions of the ACA are repealed, and the rest is maintained. Yes. Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about that. Let me get to the question and answer portion on that. So the bottom line is, the basic structure of the ACA is maintained. It is not a huge divergence from the ACA. Let me talk briefly about, and I'll come back to your question, but let me talk briefly about one more thing before we open up to Q&A. And that's Saudi Arabia and the recent weapons sale. And I'm opposed to this weapons sale. I think a lot of people have had a change in position on this based on who the president is, but this weapons sale, the process started under President Obama, and I wrote an op-ed when President Obama was in office, criticizing a portion of weapons sale to Saudi Arabia as well. And there have obviously been prior weapons sales by other presidents too, before President Obama. But when you look at the $110 billion, a portion of that is from President Obama's tenure as president as well. So I've been consistent on this. When President Obama was president, I did not support these types of sales. With President Trump, I don't support these types of sales. Saudi Arabia has not been a reliable partner. They have supported extremism throughout the world. They have a terrible human rights record. And when you look at a lot of the anti-American and anti-Christian, et cetera, extremism in the Middle East and elsewhere, it is pushed by Saudi Arabia and many of their allies. So, and absolutely, and on 9/11, many of the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. So we should not be selling these weapons to Saudi Arabia. There are some who will say, well, they provide a hedge against Iran to prevent Iran. Well, we shouldn't be helping Iran either with weapons. We don't have to help either one. I think it would be a mistake for us to sell weapons and then find that these weapons are in the hands of people who want to harm us down the road. So I'm opposed to this sale. I've introduced a joint resolution. It's bipartisan. I have Republican and Democratic co-sponsors on the joint resolution. Some of the most conservative members and some of the most progressive members in Congress are on this resolution. And in the Senate, Rand Paul has a similar joint resolution, and he's also teamed up with some Democrats on it. I'd encourage you, if, well, whatever your opinion is, if you agree or disagree, I encourage you to contact your senators and let them know how you feel about it. Because in the Senate, the joint resolution is privileged in a way that is not privileged in the House. So Rand Paul will be able to bring it up for a vote on the Senate floor. In the House, it will be difficult for me to bring it up for a vote. I don't have the ability to override the Speaker of the House. It would be up to the Speaker of the House. But in the Senate, Rand Paul has the ability to bring it up and force a vote on it. So I encourage you to contact your senators and let them know how you feel one way or the other about that sale and how you want them to vote on that resolution of disapproval. So with that, I will open it up for questions. I want to thank you again for being here, for being a part of this. And when I call on you, let me know your name and where you're from. So thanks. I'll call on you first. Yeah.
I want to start by saying I have been contacting your office continuously and have not heard a return on anything. I have been faxing, calling, talking to your staff, and have not emailing, nothing. I really would like to know about the tax cuts on the budget for the rich, over $1 trillion, and the $800 billion worth of tax cuts on the health care bill. I don't think that poor people should have their benefits cut so rich people can have tax cuts. That's not fair. I also have a question about the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2015. This act protects people with disabilities. I have faxed this to your office a whole bunch of times. It says, in response to these concerns, Congress enacted the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2015, which transferred money from the Social Security Trust Fund to the Disability Insurance Trust Fund. This act ensures that no disability benefits will be cut until at the earliest 2022. It also keeps the payments at full benefit status and does not enact any new eligibility requirements for potential applicants. How can the budget cut our disability if we are protected by this?
So I'm not sure about that Bipartisan Budget Act. I'd have to look back on it to see what it did. And I don't remember the particular vote because it's from 2015. As for contacting our office, I'm sure if you contact our office, we have people answering the phones, and you spoke to someone. Yeah, so you did talk to someone.
They said they would get with you, and nobody answered my questions.
Yeah.
I've been calling about that.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm sorry if someone didn't get back to you with the answer to this. I don't know the answer right here on the, do you want this paper back? I don't know the answer right here on the Bipartisan Budget Act or how it affects disability. But we'd have to look that up and see what the bill did, because it's been a couple of years now. What I would say on the, you talk about the tax cuts under the president's proposed budget?
And the ACA.
Yeah, so,
There's $800 billion of them, and you all know
So under the president's proposed budget, I can't speak to the tax cuts. I haven't looked carefully at the president's proposed budget because it's not a real budget. The Congress is responsible for the budget, not the president, under our system of government. So presidents do issue budgets, but they don't really mean anything in the scheme of things. The president also issued a budget earlier, and Congress completely ignored it. And this was just recently. So I haven't spent a lot of time looking at that or thinking about it. As for the tax cuts, I've always supported repealing all of the ACA, and that includes the taxes in the ACA. I support repealing all the taxes in the ACA and all of the ACA. I think we need to start over. I do believe that Medicaid should be handled at the state level, not at the federal level. And when you had Medicaid expansion, you put the federal government on the hook for the spending. And the problem with that is we are making the next generation, and unfortunately there aren't too many in this room here, but we're making the next generation pay for our spending today. And that's not okay. We're telling the next generation, people today have some needs, and so we're going to make you pay for that because we don't want to pay for it. And I don't think that's right. So I believe that we need to address this today. The best way to do it is to have it handled at the state level. I'm not opposed to a safety net at the state level. I believe that that's appropriate, that we can have a safety net at the state level of government. But we need to make sure that we are paying for it today one way or the other, either through taxes at the state level or through spending cuts at the state level. Because at the state level, unlike the federal level, you have to balance your budget. Federal level, they can just keep borrowing and printing money. But at the state level, they've got to get it balanced. And sometimes they monkey around with it to make it balance. But as a general matter, they have to make it balance. So it requires people to make decisions immediately about how to handle these items. So, you know, I didn't come here to defend the AHCA either. I don't like the bill. I think it's marginally, I think it's marginally better than the status quo. And my job as a representative, if you let me speak for a second, my job as a representative is to try to move things in what I think is the right direction, even if it's marginal. I think both the ACA and the HCA are bad. Both are bad. Neither one's going to work. And no matter what you do, if you have ACA or AHCA, our country's in trouble with both systems. So I'm not here to defend the AHCA because I think it's got a lot of problems. And I would not have handled the Medicaid issue under the AHCA the way that they did it. If I were writing the bill, I wouldn't have handled it that way. But I didn't get to write the bill. I just have to vote on it one way or the other. And I think that there would have been a way to improve other parts of the health care bill in exchange for maintaining some of the Medicaid benefits. So we maintain some of the Medicaid benefits as a backstop while making the insurance part of the health care bill better than it is currently. But they went for a different sort of compromise, and I'm not a big fan of it. Yes.
Well, one of the things that you said that was only a small, I'm sorry. My name is Marcine Telfer, and I live in Battle Creek. You said there was only marginal difference between the two health care bills, but isn't one, and maybe I'm confused, but I think one of the best parts, in my opinion, of the ACA was the Medicaid expansion for so many people who could not afford health insurance before. You know, I have a brother that's getting has gotten insurance through the Medicaid expansion that Michigan accepted. But the problem is, as I understand it, in the HCA or whatever it is, there's a significant cut in Medicaid funding to the states that did accept Medicaid expansion. And that, I think, is a very significant difference, if I understand that correctly.
Yes. Yes, that is correct, and that's what we were just discussing here. I agree with you that is a difference, and that's what we were just discussing here. As I said, I think that Medicaid should be handled at the state level, should be funded at the state level, not at the federal level, because so here's the thing. So let's all go one at a time here. I heard your concern there. So when we say that the state governments are having difficulty, the point is then not to ask our children and grandchildren to pay for it, but that's what we've been doing. And why not? Why shouldn't we ask the next generation to pay for what we want today? Because it's irresponsible. It's irresponsible to do that. So the reason there's a demographic shift that's happened. So we have fewer young people today. We have fewer young people today than we did relative to older people than we used to have. So it used to be fiscally acceptable, it would have worked, to have this payment stream where you have a lot of workers essentially paying for currently retired people, but it doesn't work anymore. And this is causing a problem for us on with a number of federal programs, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. And so we have to, so, okay, let's go one at a time. Let's go one at a time here, though. So,
Well, isn't
yeah.
our federal tax rate since the 80s?
Yeah.
Federal, I understand, I'm concerned about the deficit too. The only two presidents in my lifetime that have reduced the deficit, not the debt, but have reduced the deficit were Bill Clinton and Barack Obama that had balanced budgets. But what I'm saying is, okay, I understand that the federal government has a huge debt, partly because in the last 30 years or longer, we have made significant cuts in our federal income tax, especially at the upper levels, that were supposed to boost the economy, and I don't really think that happened. And so that's part of the reason, plus we've had these wars that have been unpaid for. And so that's part. I don't think our deficit or our debt is just because of Social Security and those kind of programs. And maybe you have one way of, you can cut them and you can say the state's have to fund them, or we could look at our federal tax structure and stop talking about making such huge tax cuts at the very top. Because we already have a huge...
So you want the government to steal from the rich?
Yes, I do.
That's immoral. That's immoral.
All right.
Covetousness
Hey,
thou shalt not.
sorry, sir, please come down. Please. Please. All right. Let's all please be respectful to each other. It's okay to have differences of opinions. We don't have to shout at each other. So we don't, sir, please. So in terms of tax dollars, you couldn't cut or raise taxes enough to make it work out. So if you're talking about raising taxes on the wealthy, it doesn't add up, just fiscally. So you can
tax Social Security up to a higher...
Yeah, I think that should be on the table as a consideration, and I also think reducing benefits to the wealthy should be considered. But at the end of the day, most of the dollars are not at the top. We have a large middle class in this country, and we still do have a large middle class in this country, and we still have a large middle class in this country, and so you have to have sweeping changes that affect a lot of people to make a big difference in the budget. And I do think that we need to start making some of these reforms. But in terms of Social Security and Medicare, it will take a while. We'll have to make some big changes to the system. But at the same time, you don't want to affect people who are currently retired. So the only way it will work out is if we make changes soon. Because if you don't want to affect people who are currently retired, you have to act faster. So like someone asked which changes. So like on Social Security, you might raise the retirement age gradually because people are living longer. When Social Security was started, people were not living much longer than 65. And now people live into their 90s and hundreds and live long lives. So you might make the retirement age gradually go up, or the benefits take a little longer to kick in. And you might, like you said, make some people pay more up to a higher level. You might reduce some of the benefits going out to some of the wealthiest. It would have to be a number of changes working together to make it work out. Medicare is much more complicated because you got to make many of those changes, but you also have to change our healthcare system. And as long as our healthcare system remains relatively expensive, Medicare costs are going to keep going up. Yes, sir.
My name is James J. Smith, Battle Creek. In your personal opinion, can you tell me why this president is so quick to chastise our allies, but yet he's reluctant to criticize Putin and Russia?
Thanks. Thanks. And no, I can't tell you why that is.
You have no opinion?
I don't know the answer.
I mean, you have no opinion of what you think. I'm asking your opinion. I'm not asking you why, because he don't even know why.
I don't.
Your opinion.
I don't know. I don't know the reason.
You don't even want to surmise.
I don't. Not really. No.
You're giving me a politician answer.
No.
You're giving me a politician answer.
Well, no. I'd really.
Man to man, person to person. What do you think?
So here, as you're just between the two of us.
Yeah,
Nobody else is paying any attention. I'd really rather not speculate about that.
You don't have a
Like, I'd rather not speculate. Look, there are ongoing investigations about things, and you're welcome. You're welcome to share your opinion.
I'll tell you mine. My opinion is this: with so much Russian smoke circling the Trump White House, there has to be some Russian fire. And day after day, we find out that people in the Trump White House, they get caught in lies about whether or not they have spoken to Russian officials. And the reason they get caught is because they're lying, because they have. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to connect the dots. And I don't understand why the Republican Party is not upset about that, because this transcends party. This is about being an American, not a Republican, not a Democrat, not an independent. This is our nation and our security that we're talking about. This is not a partisan issue. And I don't understand why Mitch McConnell, why Ryan, how come they're not upset about this? This is infringement on our democracy. Everyone should be upset about this. And for people to sit on the sidelines and do nothing, it's really appalling. My opinion.
The only thing I'll add is that I've co-sponsored two pieces of legislation. One to require the president to release his tax returns, and this would apply to every president, not just this president. It would apply to every president going forward, and also to have an independent commission to investigate all the Russia allegations. I think those are appropriate measures. I don't think that those are excessive, given the allegations out there. I think those are appropriate. I think we need to let the process work itself out. There's a special counsel. I'm hopeful we'll have an independent investigation, as I said, and you let the process work itself out. And I think it is better for the American people if it does work itself out that way, and if it's out in the open, and we can all be reassured that there's nothing going on. That would be the best outcome for the American people. Yeah. I'm going to try to walk back here. All right, I'll go back. I'll go to you.
No, you go.
He volunteers.
My name's Amy. I'm from Burlington Township. This is the third Battle Creek Town Hall I've been to, and it's the first time you've called on me. I'm encouraged to hear you say that you've learned from us, but frankly, from my point of view, you talk at us and we talk at you. So I would love to hear some examples of what you have learned from us.
Sure, and I just gave you 2 examples. I heard from my audiences at many town halls, not just this one, about the concern about the tax returns and about the independent investigation. And in fact, there are only 2, maybe 3 Republicans who are on each of these pieces of legislation. And I told people at my town halls that if I felt that some of the things got to the point where I felt we were not getting the answers we needed, or people at home were really uncomfortable with the circumstances, I would ask for the tax returns. I would ask for an independent investigation, and so I did do that. And I did that because of comments I received at town halls saying that this is something we want as a community. And so those are 2 recent examples.
Where are those bills?
So those, they're Democratic pieces of legislation, and it will be difficult to get them to the House floor because Speaker Ryan probably will not bring them to the House floor. So that is a problem. But I wanted to set an example for some of my colleagues. I don't think these are partisan pieces of legislation. The tax returns applies to every president. It's not just this president. The independent investigation will be bipartisan. And there are certainly enough allegations out there and enough concern in the community that it's worthwhile to have an independent investigation. And I think that it would be good to have that stuff out in the open and have it be public and have everyone reassured. My hope is that there's nothing going on, that everything's fine, and then we can all move on to very important pieces of legislative work. Yeah. I'll go to, sorry, this gentleman. No, you're going to lose your turn.
No, that's okay. My name is Shailesh Dubey, and I'm from Battle Creek. And the question I have is, against all odds and all opinions, what I think the reason why President was elected is American people are feeling that jobs are flowing away from us. Even though the numbers, unemployment numbers are low, but if you go out, people feel that we have been losing jobs. And he promised that he will bring the jobs either back or create the jobs. And that message has been lost in all this politics. So what you plan to do to bring jobs or create jobs longer term, not just temporary, like changing structure and economy for the country, for United States, for Michigan, and for Battle Creek?
That's a good question. I do think we need tax reform. I think that's critically important. Our corporate tax code is not good right now. What happens is a few companies that are very large pay almost no taxes, and yet there are many other businesses that pay too many taxes, where they're paying double taxes, especially some of our small businesses pay a lot in taxes. So we need to restructure the whole corporate tax system. And one of the problems we face also is when our companies build factories overseas, they have a hard time bringing the money back here because they'll be taxed on it. So we do have an unusual tax code that is different from the tax codes across the world, where the United States is taxing companies twice on profits. And I think that's not good for our economy. I think we have too many burdensome regulations. this is, there are a lot of areas where I have disagreed with the president. I agree with him on the overly burdensome regulations, that there are just too many, and we need to reduce the number of regulations we have. All these regulations end up hurting working people in the United States, and they reduce the amount of competition. They're often requested by very large corporations who actually want to wipe out the competition. They come to us. I think that's probably the most surprising thing when you get to the legislature or to Congress, that a lot of people don't realize on the outside before they are elected, is that the regulations are requested by the corporations. They come to us and they say, could you put these regulations in place? And you wonder why it is, but actually it's so they can stop some smaller competitor. And I've had, in many cases, businesses come to me and say, could we get these regulations? And when I dug into it, I realized, well, this will harm one of their competitors while helping them. And so we need to reduce these things, allow for more competition, and reduce taxes, and reform the overall tax code. Sorry, does the president want to cut corporate tax rates? So the current tax proposal by the Speaker of the House is revenue neutral. So it does not cut taxes. It just shifts taxes around. It doesn't really, it doesn't among corporations. So the president has said that, and I do think the president wants to actually cut the tax rate. The problem is you can't have everything. If you're going to keep our budget balanced, you have to find ways to look at all of the taxes and all of the spending and consider all of it together. One of the mistakes I think the president is making is that he's saying we're not going to reform Social Security and Medicare. But those are the largest portions of our budget besides military spending, which is another area I think he should reform. Social Security, military spending, Medicare, 3 largest areas. If those are off the table, well, that's a huge portion of our budget. It is very hard to balance the budget, and it's very hard to cut taxes if you're not going to reform those areas. The president's proposals, the budget proposals he's made so far, don't want to address Social Security and Medicare, and then they want to increase military spending. So it's not going to work. It doesn't work mathematically. It doesn't work mathematically. And that's why when you see his budget proposal, it's not realistic. It says that Social Security and Medicare will be left as they are, and military spending will go up, and then a whole bunch of other stuff is cut significantly. I'll give you an example here in Michigan. It was like the Great Lakes funding goes to zero under the budget. Well, Congress is not going to pass a $0 Great Lakes budget, so it's not realistic. But that's what happens when you keep increasing spending in in some areas like military spending and not addressing Social Security and Medicare. And to touch on military spending, the president himself several months ago cited a report saying that there was $125 billion of waste in the Department of Defense. Well, if there is such waste, we should find that waste and use those dollars to pay for other military spending instead of increasing the spending. You could find that waste and move those dollars into the places where you need it, so you wouldn't have to increase spending the same way. And it would set I think it would set a good example in negotiations with Democrats to say, look, we're willing to make some changes here. We're willing to find waste within the budgets that we like, and try to improve the overall system.
Can you be a little more concise? We have 2 minutes left. We have tons of
I'm sorry. We'll have time, sir. Trust me. Yeah, yes.
Hi, I'm Linda Weatherby from Battle Creek. I am asking, this afternoon, Trump said that he was going to pull out of the Paris Agreement, which I think is a horrible idea. But I'm asking for a civics lessons. Can he make that decision on himself? What's the role of the Congress in this?
Yeah. So, Okay, that's a great question. So, so here's the issue. The agreement is not ratified. It's not validly ratified under our Constitution because the Senate has to approve the agreement. And so President Obama, when he signed it without ratifying it, did not put it into effect. The United States is not a party to the agreement under our Constitution. An agreement like that has to come back to the Senate and has to be ratified by the Senate. So President Trump hasn't really pulled us out of anything because we're not in it. We're not in it under our Constitution. Well, if you look, I spent some time looking at what the rest of the world did, by the way, with respect to the Paris Agreement. And what I found is country after country had their legislative branch ratify their agreement. So in countries like Haiti or Turkmenistan, they actually took it to the parliament and ratified it. But here in the United States, the beacon for the world, in terms of representative government and being a constitutional republic, we did not have our Senate ratify the agreement. The president unilaterally acted. President Obama. I don't know the answer to that.
Because that's the whole reason of pulling out.
Yeah.
Because we're supposedly getting money for other countries.
Yeah.
That's why we're pulling out.
Yeah.
That's what he said today on TV.
So.
No, the Paris Agreement.
So I couldn't tell you what monies have been spent on it at this point, but I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that we are not validly in the agreement, so pulling out of the agreement is almost nonsensical. It doesn't really make any sense. Yeah. So the House of Representatives has no role in this. It is an agreement that's supposed to be with the involvement of the executive branch and the Senate. So I'm in the House of Representatives. I don't have a say on this agreement, but it should go to this. It should go to the Senate, and it should be debated there, and they should have a vote on it there. And if the senators agree to support it, then they support it. I can tell you, I've looked I've skimmed through the agreement because I haven't spent a lot of time looking at all the details of it, but I spent some time looking through it today, and it's not very precise in its requirements. It's not exactly what I would call an agreement with very defined provisions. It's pretty loosey-goosey. And in many ways, it looks like the kind of thing that is there for appearances and not for actual function. That you have a lot of things that developing countries must do, but it's pretty undefined. And there are things that developed countries must do, but it's, again, pretty undefined. It's a fairly vague agreement. That's all the more reason that it should go to the Senate and be debated there so it can be discussed how this kind of thing would be implemented in practice. Because we don't know in practice what will happen. All we have is this very vague agreement. So send it to the Senate, have them debate it, discuss how it might be implemented in practice, and then they can vote yes or no on it. So as a House member, I don't have a role there, but that's something that I think we should do.
Yeah, but you have an opinion, though.
Yeah. As it is, I wouldn't support it because it's very vague, it's undefined, and we haven't had a debate in the Senate. Yeah.
So you would do what the president did.
Well, I would.
You were the president, would you have pulled out?
Well, if I were the president, I would have said that we were never in it. And I would have made that clear. I would have made that clear to the American people.
One of 3 countries that would have been out. Is that correct?
Well, we were never in it. We were never in it because the Senate didn't ratify it. And we should be, as Americans, we shouldn't say as Americans that it's okay for the United States to have one person unilaterally sign us on to a treaty when in other countries that don't have our level of prestige in the world, the agreement is going through their parliaments to be voted on.
But in the
That's so.
We're not going to be a leader in the progressive and helping our planet.
So we can be a leader, but we need to have it go through the constitutional process. That's how the system works. That's how the system works. Let me be clear. If some of you are worried that the Senate won't support it, well, that's what the American people want. Those are the senators that were elected. So if you don't like those senators, you choose different senators. That's the way the system works. That's the way the system works. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Amash, thank you very much for having another town hall meeting. We appreciate that. I have more of a statement than a question. Okay, who are we? Americans. Great, great. You know, okay, we are Republicans, we are Democrats, Libertarians, and most of all, we are legal U.S. citizens. Are we? Are we not? Are we not, really? Anyways, I believe it is most important that we are all U.S. citizens. I also believe that it is most important that we keep our constitutional freedom and rights. Do you agree? I mean, do you agree? Basically. Okay, now I think we have something that we can agree on. Now I think it's time for us to come together and work as a nation. Several nations have declared war against us, publicly, politically. Iran, Syria, North Korea, and who knows? Now that's a joke. Now, no, really. Okay, now we have to work together or we will perish. And thank you very much, Mr. Amash. We appreciate you.
Thanks.
Thank you again for coming, Mr. Amash. I appreciate it. I was wondering about the student loans and what's going to happen with the millennials. They have a lot to pay back, and as we all know, college has hit such high records at being affordable. And the people that are in the executive branches make lots of money. The people who are in public service, like teachers and medical field, they're not making enough money. The student loans, like if we want good people in education, what are we going to do? The student loans are so high now. And doesn't Betsy DeVos have kind of a stake in student loans? It's just scary to me that these kids are starting out with so much debt. What do you think needs to be done, or what do you want to do for your constituents?
Sure. I think there's too much government involvement in student loans, and that's one of the reasons that school debt is so high, because there was an effort to push as many people into four-year colleges as we can, and we are making loans so easy for people that you have students who don't really want to go to a four-year college, who are then taking up degrees in Romance languages or whatever, and then they leave school with a massive debt and find it difficult to get a job. And a big part of that is because the government is subsidizing the loan industry and making the loans very easy. So you have to go back to a more market-based system, and you will have people then making more rational choices about what they do. And there is nothing. I believe people should go into those fields. They should go into medical, they should go into teaching, but they can also go into a number of other fields that don't require a four-year degree. And that's okay. We need all, as a community, we need all sorts of people. We need people doing all sorts of jobs. And I think that people should make those decisions rationally. And I have seen, as a representative who has applicants to my office, You know, I get young people applying from college to my office. I often see this in the applications where the degrees are in very unusual things, and many of these students then wonder why it's so difficult to get a job. So I think we need to have people making more rational decisions, and the way to do that is not to make the government subsidized loans so easy to get. I think that makes it, that encourages people to be wasteful.
Like the interest rates.
Yeah.
Much should the interest?
Oh, I'm not. I don't want to set the interest rates. I'm not. I'm not in the interest rate setting business. But the market should determine that, not me. Yeah. Yeah. I'm giving.
Yeah. A couple comments first on things that's been brought up. Warren Buffett has said for years that it is wrong that his secretary, who at that time made $45,000 a year, was in a higher tax bracket than he was. On the comment about the boss, charter schools, they only go elementary. They don't have any busing. They don't have any sports programs, but yet they get the same dollar amount that Battle Creek school system, Harker Creek system, Lakeview system gets, but they've got to have the broader payments for the more education that is applied. It ain't just math, it's algebra, trigonometry, and everything else. And she rewards the Republicans by putting money back into their campaigns. And what they should do on a state level, have the systems break it down. How much does it cost to do elementary? How much does it cost to do middle school? How much does it cost to do high school? And make the payments on that. And then subtract what they don't have, busing, etc. But on the Social Security end of it, you made a comment at Penfield that there would be no change for anybody currently drawing. But you were going to look for something different for the new people. Okay? Well, if there's no change for us, if nobody's paying in, we paid into it all of our lives for those people that retired. Well, if they ain't going to be paying in for us, then there's a hell of a change for us.
So to be clear, because I think there's a misunderstanding. The payments going to seniors would stay the same. So nobody has proposed changing what is going to people who are currently retired today.
But if younger people aren't paying into that system, who's going to pay?
So what I'm saying is you're going to have to have a different system for young people, and young people may end up having to double pay. So they would end up paying for you and for themselves. So, but you see, this is the bind we've gotten ourselves into with all this debt and all this borrowing. It's not easy to unwind it, and we're being irresponsible as a country. We're being irresponsible. Everyone wants someone else to pay for the stuff we get today, and that's not okay. At some point, we have to decide: are we going to be responsible, fiscally responsible as a country, or not? And we're not being responsible right now, and it leads to things like this, where young people who are already going to have all sorts of other difficulties may have to pay twice for seniors today and for themselves to reform the Social Security system. And that's really unfortunate.
I've been paying into the Social Security program since I was 14 damn years old.
Yep.
Okay? And a lot of people benefited from the money I put in for them.
Absolutely.
And I would expect the same thing from the younger generation to do the same benefit for me.
Yes. We understand that. The issue is there have been demographic changes. So if you look back a few generations, the families were bigger. They're smaller now. So people only have 2 children. And so instead of looking like a pyramid, now it looks like a column. It's a different world. There are not as many people, there are not as many working age people to pay for people who are currently retired.
The Republican Party, okay, going to make up the difference to us to fill the commitment made to us. No, they're not going to tax the billionaires and everything else. They're going to cut taxes for them so that they can put more pressure and buy more politicians to keep on that safe side.
So,
there's no.
So, yeah.
The program that's going on right now, what you're talking about, is a farce. If you're gonna look at another way of coming up with it, then do it through taxing the people that have got the money to tax.
But you cannot, as I said earlier, you can't tax people enough to make up the difference. And this is a massive structural problem. It is much bigger than just taxing the wealthiest people, who, by the way, already pay a lot of taxes. They already pay a very high percentage of total taxes. So, yeah, I'm sorry, but I got different people competing for the mic. All right. Yes, sir.
My name's Dave. I'm from Battle Creek. If I may, since I've got the opportunity, I'd like to ask you 2 questions. First, what will your position be as it regards cuts to the EPA specifically affecting the health of the Great Lakes? That's first. Second, how do you defend your vote for the AHCA in the face of $800 billion taken away from Medicaid and given in tax cuts to folks who make $250,000 or more? Those are my 2 questions, at least for now. I've got a lot more, but those will be 2.
So as for the EPA, I don't know specifically which cuts you're referring to, but I think that with respect to the Great Lakes,
$100,000 from the Medicaid.
no, about the EPA.
Clean water,
When it comes down the pipe,
Yeah,
which it is,
yeah.
what will your position be as it in connection to cuts to the health of the Great Lakes? You're going to vote for some cuts to EPA, are you not?
Possibly. I don't know what will come up as a vote. I don't know.
Spoken like a true politician.
But I'm not the Speaker of the House. I can't tell you what's going to be voted on.
Will you support cuts to the EPA?
I support some cuts to the EPA, and there are other cuts I wouldn't support. It depends on.
It relates to the health of the Great Lakes.
Well, it depends on what the specific cuts relate to. So when you say the health of the Great Lakes, there might be different aspects of EPA regulation that are, and they will be very specific. So I don't support the president's cuts to that. I don't support that. Now, I don't know what exact dollar amount I would support. We're going to have.
One of the congressmen that signed on to that.
Right, because I don't think that you should sign on to letters like that. I don't think so. Because what ends up happening when you sign on to a letter like that, where you tell someone, I won't cut this, and then someone else says, sign this letter, and it says, don't cut that, and then someone else says, sign this letter, and says, don't cut that, then you get to the place where you need to negotiate and compromise, and you've signed 12 letters or 15 letters that say you can't cut anything. So that's not an acceptable way to legislate. I don't operate like that. A lot of my colleagues, they sign these letters. They don't even read them, by the way. Their staff get the letter, and they sign the letter because it's feel good and it makes people at home feel like their representative is doing something. And it's totally irresponsible. Totally irresponsible. Yeah.
My name is Terry Souls. I live here in Battle Creek. My question is, we have people coming in from all over the world that are collecting government welfare, government loans. They're getting paid even more than some of our veterans when they come in. And we're talking about spending my kids' money, and they're going to have to pay double. Why don't we just cut this, and what can we do as Americans to stop this influx of people from every country collecting money? They should work and have a job. That's what we used to do.
Well, so that's hard to answer without knowing the specific allegation you're making about what program and all that. But just as a general matter, there's a problem with the welfare system generally. So it's not just about immigrants. It's not just about immigrants coming in.
That's why are we paying people who aren't Americans?
Well, are you talking about people who are here illegally or legal?
No, I'm talking about people that are coming in our country and applying for it right away and getting it.
But they're coming here legally.
No, they're not coming here legally. They're just coming in on passes, the green cards.
Green cards. So I don't know. You're talking about people who have green cards.
talking about the people that are coming from other countries that are flying to stay here, but they don't have jobs and we're not.
Well, I don't know the order of when someone can start receiving benefits or not. I do think that someone shouldn't come here and immediately start receiving benefits without having a job and made a difference. But I think that's the way our system works. I might be wrong. So, yes, sir.
You are very correct in the sense that the United States really needs to talk about its aging population. Just as an example, was until a week ago the county director of senior services. We had a lunch for centenarians. We had 21 individuals that we could find that can make it to a lunch from Calhoun County. These people are out there and the number is growing and growing. But I'll tell you right now, and I've said it before, there is nothing that Trump has done or will ever do that will help our older adults. He's unethical. He's a narcissistic person. His family is corrupt, and I do not trust him. I do not trust him. His family should be put in jail for some of the things they are doing unethically. I'll tell you, we got problems with this man, and I don't want to consider him as my president.
My question is in regards to House Resolution 1973. Could you explain to everybody what that is and why you were one of only 3 congressmen who voted no?
Sure. There was a bill related to crimes related to sexual predators at the federal level. And these kinds of crimes are unconstitutional at the federal level. And there are reasons that the federal government is not supposed to handle crimes like this. And in fact, we had several bills like this come up during in the past couple weeks. And on most of these bills, the most progressive Democrats actually joined with me in opposing the legislation. This particular bill, because it related to an actual incident that was part of the Olympic Committee, many people were then politically afraid to vote the right way on it. The reason that you shouldn't have federal crimes, and the Constitution is pretty clear. There are a few federal crimes that are permitted. Treason, counterfeiting, and crimes on the high seas. So like piracy. So these are federal crimes. But there's a reason you shouldn't have federal crimes, and the reason that the framers of the Constitution did not expect the federal government to criminalize things. When you have a federal crime, you end up with what's equivalent to a double jeopardy situation, where someone can be charged with something at the state level and acquitted, they're found not guilty, and then the federal government comes in and says, hey, we want to go after him again. And we don't want that kind of justice system in this country where someone is under jeopardy multiple times for the same thing. It's bad for our criminal justice system. It's bad for the rights of Americans. We don't operate that way at the state level. If a state government charges you with something, they're not supposed to charge you again. This wasn't considered much of a problem in the early days that you might face double jeopardy like this because we didn't have federal crimes. There were no federal crimes like this. But now, as the federal government continues to add crimes, now you're running into this double jeopardy problem. And it's not considered double jeopardy because it's state versus federal. But it's essentially equivalent to double jeopardy. So you don't want...
The civil rights movement, when southern states were not convicting people of crimes like
So the Constitution permits, for example, certain civil rights and equal protection measures by the Congress. Nobody disagrees with that. Well, with respect to ensuring that states are not discriminating against people on a number of bases, yeah, absolutely, those are okay. But with respect to everyday criminality, the federal government is not supposed to have a role because you end up with that situation that is equivalent to double jeopardy. You end up with having to enlarge your federal police force to deal with all of these things. So instead of the state police handling something or local police. You have a federal police force that now has to enforce this. You also end up with more and more states just leaving criminality to the federal government, because now they say, well, something is a crime at the federal level, so in order to save resources, we're not going to spend resources on prosecuting these things or dealing with these things. We'll just leave it to the federal government. They can borrow money and print money. So that's another problem. And then it also ties up our court system, our federal court system. So instead of dealing with actual federal issues, now the federal court system gets tied up with things that are state-type criminality. And drugs are a perfect example, where our federal court system spends a large portion of its time on things like marijuana cases instead of actually handling federal issues. So there are a number of reasons to oppose federal crimes. That's why I opposed it, and I think everyone should oppose making more things into federal crimes. Yes.
Okay. Since you let that gentleman ask 2 questions, I'm going to do it too. My name is Deborah Look, and I have lived in Harper Creek for nearly 40 years. My first question is pretty short, is that when President Trump, being interviewed by Lester Holt, admitted that he thought about the Russian investigation when he was firing Comey, don't you believe that that's getting within spitting distance of obstruction of justice? So that's my first question. Okay. And then my second question is, do you think that philosophically that health care is a right? Just like education is a right, just like voting is a right? Okay. My sister's in the medical field, and she says that healing is an art, and medicine is science, and healthcare is big business. We are one of the few civilized countries that profits off of people's bad luck, not just smoking and bad decisions, like eating too much. And so getting cancer and things like that, isn't it a basic human right to have, or is it a commodity that you only get because you can afford it? So obstruction of justice, and is healthcare a right, or is it a commodity? Thanks a lot for being here.
Thanks. So on the obstruction of justice issue, I don't know the answer. I don't practice in this area of law, and I don't know what.
I have an opinion. I'm not a lawyer.
So it likely is not. It likely doesn't meet the requisite intent. That's what I would suspect. Because you have to meet an intent threshold, but I don't know. I don't practice in this particular area, so I couldn't tell you. As for is healthcare a right? No, it's not a right. No, a right is something that someone else can't do to you. It's not something you can extract from someone else. And when you are asking, when you're saying that healthcare is a right, you're saying that you want someone else to perform a service for you, and that is not a right. In the traditional sense of things. A right is things that people can't do to you. And if you look at our Constitution and you look at the things that are protected as rights, like freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, these are things that the government or the people through the government can't do to you. They can't take these things away from you. It can never be something that you are extracting from someone else. That's not a right in the traditional definition. Yeah, we have a privilege as citizens to vote in this country.
I wanted to go back to this man's question about the budget and Social Security. And I was thinking Social Security taxes are capped, are they not, at, is it 125,000? 118, okay, thank you. So if we lifted the cap on Social Security, you would get more income, it would help the repair the budget. The other thing that Buffett mentions is that capital gains is not taxed for Social Security at all. So all the stock market goes way up. None of that is taxed for Social Security purposes. And it's taxed at a lower rate. So if you taxed capital gains at the regular income rate, and you taxed it for Social Security, you'd get a lot more money into the Treasury. So I would lift the cap on Social Security, consider that, and then my final statement would be consider a carbon tax. The carbon tax was proposed years ago to help global warming, and the carbon tax could replace this part of the Social Security tax and the payroll taxes.
So I will definitely look at, I'm actually sitting down with my Democratic colleagues to learn more about the carbon tax. I'm not saying I'm committing to a carbon tax, to be clear, but I'm learning more about it from one of my colleagues who wanted to talk to me about it. As for Social Security taxes, as I said, I think everything should be on the table when we're talking about how to balance our budget. So I don't want to, just like I talked about that letter I wouldn't sign, I also will not take things off the table like that. I'm not willing to take things off the table. I think that we need to have freedom to negotiate with Democrats and Republicans and to make sure that we can try to balance our budget. I really do think that with our $20 trillion debt, we need to address this. We need to address it as soon as possible. And if we don't address it quickly, we're going to be in big trouble. Yeah, that's right. So sorry, let me just address this quickly. So if you talk to high earners, and I've talked to some of them about this issue, business leaders in the community and in our district, and I asked them about Social Security, and they are comfortable, though all the ones I've talked to, I still haven't met one who feels otherwise. They are comfortable not receiving Social Security benefits or paying a little more. They are comfortable with that. They believe that, no, I'm not one. So they believe that,
Set up a system so they can volunteer.
so they believe, many of the people that I've talked to believe that they would rather have, in exchange, if you're choosing between alternatives, they'd rather have fewer benefits in terms of Social Security or pay a little more, in exchange have fewer regulations and a better tax code for our corporations. Yes.
My name is Linda, and I live in Marshall currently, have for many years. My question goes back quite a ways to the Citizens United ruling. The person who took that case to the Supreme Court is currently working in the White House. He was just brought in, David Bossie. The idea that a corporation is a person and that they can donate to PACs, super PACs, and so on, across state lines, as I understand it, so that here in Michigan, when Marshall had a millage issue for the schools, and there was money coming, they were trying to set laws at our state legislature saying that people who worked for the schools couldn't campaign on the issues after a certain period, but money could come in from out of the state to influence the election. Luckily, and I will say luckily, that was overturned, and they were able to put up signs and things saying we need millage money. And there was a free vote on that. But now we've gotten into where they've cut funding for IRS, so they can't follow through on seeing where is money going and who has it, where did it come from to finance campaigns. You and I mean, unless there's a multi-billionaire in here, how do we compete with that money? It turns it into what, kleptocracy, oligarchy, all of those names for money rules. And that the vote of the individual citizen has very little say anymore. So what's your opinion on that? How do you resist lobbyists, those people who come from the big corporations and say, here, add this?
Well, I resist through having principles. That's the way it should work. I receive less than just about anyone in Congress from PACs. And I certainly don't have a whole bunch of super PACs who are out there to support me. They're mostly out there to try to knock me out of Congress. Yep. So if you look every election, you'll see that I'm outspent and I have people coming against me, and sometimes in my own party. The problem you want to address runs in conflict with the Constitution, though. We have freedom of speech under our Constitution. And the ACLU also agrees with this position. So you have a progressive group, the ACLU, who agrees with this position. They are in favor of Citizens United, the ACLU. So that's a progressive organization because they're worried about the free speech implications. When you have corporations, which is groups of people working together essentially to make a statement, this happens in all sorts of areas. It's not just someone running an ad in a super PAC, through a super PAC, it's also a book. A book is run through a corporation. How about a movie? So if you're going to start regulating these things, regulating TV ads, then, well, we should be able to stop Hollywood from producing films. Yeah, they're the same. They're the same. It's an identical thing. A TV ad with a political perspective, is not different from a movie with a political perspective. They are both things run by corporations, and they're both being used to persuade people. So, same with a book. Same. I'm sorry?
It was a political movie. Clinton Cash.
Yeah. So you're sorry. Sorry. So you'd be against a movie. You'd be against a movie being made because it's political?
Don't do that.
No, but that's
don't try that. No, don't try.
Isn't that what you?
I worked with Deloitte.
Well, here I'm saying, you are free. You are free to explain.
All the time in Donald Trump.
You are free to explain your position. I'll give you the.
Of course, I don't think that movies should be legislated. But when a movie is made up of lies and is designed to hurt a political candidate, then I think there's a problem with that. I don't have a problem with laws being established to uphold our Constitution. Freedom of speech is not about a corporation being a person. That's not what that's about. So please, again, don't try to do that to us. I will say
So, with all due respect, I disagree very strongly that you should prohibit a movie from being made because it has a political perspective. I disagree with that. I disagree that you should prohibit a book from being released because it has a political perspective. Just because it's a corporation running these things doesn't mean that it should be prohibited. These are groups of people working together to release something that presents an idea, and it might be a political perspective, and I don't think we should be regulating that stuff. And we have a First Amendment precisely to protect us against that kind of thing. My parents came here as immigrants. My mom is Syrian, came from Syria, where they do regulate these things, where they do prohibit you from speaking your mind. And they are proud that they live in a country, my parents live in a country now, and they have a son in Congress, protecting things like the First Amendment, protecting our right to speak up and to present different political perspectives. And it is absolutely the same thing whether someone runs a super PAC ad, which, by the way, doesn't benefit me. If anyone would want to stop them from a political standpoint, it would be me. I'm tremendously helped if super PAC ads stop, because they're going to be going after me relentlessly. They'll be going after me relentlessly. So it helps me to stop them, but I don't think that that's the way our country should be. That's not freedom under our system. I think that I don't have a problem with some accountability where we pass a law where you have some increased transparency. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Yep. Sorry. All right.
That's right. My name's Lindsay Wheeler from Battle Creek. George Urbay, who was a socialist professor, I think, wrote in 2000 about communism. The eradication of stubbornly resistant nationalities was adopted as a policy of state in the Soviet Union. It took 3 forms. This is called genocide: physical extermination, Cultural genocide by suppression of national language and traditions, like we're tearing down Confederate statues down there, that's a form of genocide. Then dilution of the ethnic stock by encouraging settlement of people from other nationalities on a nation's territory. The 1965 Immigration Act changed the 1925 Nationality Act, which was about preserving the homogeneity of our country. The 1965 Act, the Immigration Act, was about moving all sorts of people in here. Now, I read my Bible, and the Tower of Babel was condemned by God. I think immigration is wrong, and it's against against God's will. What are you going to do? We need to stop the immigration in this country.
Okay, I don't agree with you, but that's an example of freedom of speech. Right? So, but I don't agree with you, sir. Yeah.
Mr. Amash, are you saying that if we had our founding fathers right here sitting on the stage, all of them up there, and they found out that our votes are counting less and less as we go through time here, and money counts more and more, they wouldn't do something about that? They would.
Well, they had a very different system back then, frankly. Women weren't voting, so there were slaves, so there were a lot of problems with our country back then. So I wouldn't want to think about what they would think of today's system with respect to that, with respect to voting. But what I'm saying is everyone has the right to vote in this country now. Everyone has the right to vote. We are protecting people's rights to vote, and we have to protect people's right to free speech. So we have the right to vote in this country. We must also protect people's right to free speech. Yeah.
My name is Rick. I'm from Battle Creek. I want to change direction just a little bit. There's so many issues with veteran health care, about being real slow and, taking forever and they don't quite get covered the way they should. How about taking all the rights that they have for their health care and putting them out on the open market with that insurance policy instead of forcing them to go to a Veterans Administration where they might die waiting to get seen? They'll have more die.
So that's a great question. I do think that our veterans should have more options. I do think that we should give them market-based options. I know you disagree, so I'll give you the mic in a second. There are some people who have been helped through our VA system and many people who think that it's failing and it's not working for them. And I do know that there have been long waiting lists and it's difficult to get in, and some people have to travel very far to go to get the service they need, to get the care they need. So I do think that we should provide more options and allow people to use the private market as well as the VA system.
I just want to talk to you about the VA somewhat. They started the Veterans Choice Program last year before last, where you're supposed to go, they contract with somebody, you go out in the economy, and they pay for it. I've had surgery and everything else, and the Veterans Choice Program says I wasn't authorized, even though the VA says I was. And so they're not paying the bills, and I'm still getting billed for it. And the VA is trying to fight them at the same time. So that doesn't work, because if they decide, for whatever reason, that you're not authorized, you're not authorized. And they won't pay it unless you get all kind of hell started. So that's one thing out in the economy, having civilian health care and all provided for that way is not going to work. It hasn't ever worked with the VA. Yeah, people die waiting, but that's because the VA doesn't have the money given to them to actually provide caregivers and everything else. If you keep taking the money away from them, yeah, more and more people's going to die waiting. But then You go out there, and because they say, no, you're authorized or you're not authorized, and you don't get the care because you're not authorized, you die anyway. So where are you at?
So I think there are ways to address some of the concerns mentioned here, but I do agree with you. I think that we should allow more options to our veterans, and any problems there are with the system, we can try to fix. We have tried to provide more money to the VA. That hasn't worked. I think one time just recently Congress provided them more money, and then suddenly they came back and said, oh, we're a few billion short. And it wasn't easy to explain. It wasn't easy to explain to Congress how that happened. And Congress essentially bailed out the VA again with taxpayer dollars. So we need to make sure we're not constantly just throwing money at a system that is to a system that doesn't work. We need to find ways to change it.
Hi, I'm Nancy from Battle Creek as well. And 2 points. One is that I've actually been on a number of boards, including healthcare related. And I could just say that one of the things that's concerning to me is that we did see in this community a very high level of emergency room visits by people before the expansion of the Medicaid. So I know the difficulty that's going to arise if indeed people start losing their healthcare coverage through that expansion, because what is going to happen is the hospitals will need still to see them. They will still take them into the emergency room, and it does cause a real problem with bad debt, and you'll see regional hospitals close. It's just, it's true. It's true. And so unless you have, if the access to care issue becomes, can you afford to get the transportation to go to a major medical center? Because those will be the larger ones with consolidation in the healthcare industry are the only ones that will survive. So that's one piece. Then the other thing is that when you mentioned earlier that you don't see a lot of younger voters in this room, and I actually have 2 children who are in their 20s, things that matter to them include things like climate control. So today's news is very disappointing to a lot of people who are, and also they're very native speakers to things like the internet. So they do not have traditional borders as it relates for economic growth for their futures. So I think about this from the Republican Party's standpoint, which is that there's a lot of people who are, especially in their 20s and 30s, who are looking for a home. And I want to know from a perspective of a Republican Party, how do you appeal to 20-somethings who do really have an interest in things like climate control and environmental issues, and also knowing that they are a part of a global community as opposed to a very isolationist mentality.
Thanks. I do think we can talk about those issues. There are differences between many Republicans and many Democrats on those issues. So I'm not sure that all of the positions, say, on climate change that many of my Republican colleagues have is going to be appealing to the young person in your family or maybe some other young people. But there may be other positions we have that are appealing, and I do think Republicans are paying more attention to some of the technological changes and some of the privacy concerns and other things that are out there related to the internet and our economy generally as well, like the taxes and regulations that they're going to face in the future, the debt they're going to face. I think those are important issues to young people, and I think we need to address them as a party. Frankly, I don't think either party is doing a great job right now, speaking to young people. So I don't think either party is doing a great job. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One is that young people generally are just less interested in politics. And so many of my colleagues end up catering to the people they think are going to be voting, which is generally an older demographic. If you look at a primary race, for example, often the voters are over 60. It's pretty typical. That's pretty typical. Like half the voters might be over 60. So it doesn't do as much for members of Congress to cater to young people because they feel like, well, it's not going to help them at election time. And so that's how, sadly, a lot of them think about it. I encourage young people to come to these town halls because I think it's important that their voices be heard. But neither party's doing a good job. And when you look at the most recent candidates we had two candidates who were older. And I do think that's also not as appealing to young people. I mean, no offense to the older people in the room. But I think that they want to see candidates who are more their age or who are maybe more attuned to some of their concerns. So, yeah, I'm getting older too now. I'm starting to gray. My hair's turning gray at least.
Washington does that. Hi, my name is Linda Best, and I'm from Battle Creek. So, my friends and family call me liberal. I did vote for you. There are certain things that I'm really impressed about your the work that you do, and there are other things that I can't get my head around at all. So I really have been looking into this libertarian perspective of things for the last year, 2 years, because I really want to understand it, because I get what you're saying about certain things that seem anti-liberal or whatever. Here's the conclusion I've come to so far, that the libertarian position, and a lot of times your position, and especially tonight, listening earlier to your description of the Medicaid moving from the federal level to the state level, the conclusion I've come to is that, well, listening to you later than that too, is that first of all, that position that you have is as idealistic as my liberal position is, but also the libertarian position seems to, I define it as the survival of the fittest. So if Medicaid cannot be funded by the feds and the state doesn't have the money to fund it, then, and you don't have enough money, make enough money, then we don't know what to tell you. There is no answer to that question. If you have the money to afford, if you have the ability, the financial ability to access health care, then no problem. But it doesn't speak to all the people who are going to get kicked off of Medicaid and also do not have the financial ability to afford the increased fines, which the Republicans were totally against, and now you're telling me that it's exactly the same, only it's just for a year, which just baffles me. But anyway, it's the survival of the fittest. The rich are going to be fine, and the ones that are on that borderline, good luck, and the rest of you, too bad. Am I misreading this?
Yeah, I don't agree with that assessment. So, I don't agree with that. So, as a libertarian, I believe very strongly in our constitutional structure. I think it's really important. And it's not important just for the sake of following the Constitution. Okay? The Constitution is designed the way it is for important reasons. Because the framers of the Constitution understood that if you have the federal government handling certain things that affect the whole nation, and then the state governments handling other things that are more local in character or where people might have pretty significant differences of opinion, you can maximize happiness. Doesn't mean that everyone's going to be happy. It just means you can maximize the amount of happiness. And I use the word happiness because that's really the way to describe it, and the Declaration of Independence actually describes it that way. So when I talk about moving things from the federal government to the state government, I think that in the long run, that is the best thing to do. And it is consistent with the way our system was designed and in the way I think is most effective. But I'm also an incrementalist. And I come here and I might explain to you the ideal system I would like, but to get there I have to take incremental steps. So we have legislation all the time. Every week I vote on things that I don't like. every week, because they're just incrementally in the right direction, but I still have big problems with them. So I can't go and just say, well, this isn't my ideal system, so vote no on it. You can't operate that way, because then you'd vote no on every piece of legislation. So actually, I vote yes more often than I vote no, contrary to popular opinion. And have consistently voted yes more than I vote no, even though I do have lots of concerns with the legislation that's out there. So it's about incrementalism and gradually moving things back to the state level, and also protecting the rights of individuals. And I think that's where a libertarian does a better job than Democrats or Republicans, frankly, generally speaking, conservatives or progressives. I think libertarians have focused more on protecting individual rights. And that's why when we have these issues come up, including that bill I talked about earlier about federal crimes, I might take the lead in opposing something like that. Or when we had the NSA issue come up, where the NSA was found to be spying on millions of Americans, I took the lead on that because I believe very strongly in protecting individual rights. And there are lots of votes that you will never hear about because they're very minor in the scheme of things, where I think that something is being done that violates the Constitution in a way that is unfair. Someone is getting a special benefit. Sometimes it's a land transfer. You're not going to hear about some land transfer in Nebraska. We vote on that kind of stuff all the time, frankly, like random land transfers. You won't even hear about it at home because it's such a minor issue. But I will sometimes be the only person opposing something like that because it's a violation of due process or equal protection, or I'm concerned about something that is giving a benefit to one person but not providing the same benefit to everyone else. And I've taken some votes that have put me at odds with my party along the way because I believe so strongly in following the Constitution and protecting liberty. And you have to look at the totality of it. You have to look at the totality of it. And what am I trying to accomplish with all that? And does this independence benefit our country or not? And I think it does benefit the country. I think it is good to have independent voices there who are pushing us in a direction of greater liberty, even if I can't push us all the way there. But I'm constantly moving us in that direction. Sorry? Great. So protecting the equal rights of all people. That's what I mean. So all people should be protected under our system. All people have natural rights. We have natural rights, I believe, given to us from God. But these are natural rights, and we have the right to be ourselves and make decisions for our own lives. And a lot of times, government tries to take those rights away. And both parties will be trying to take those rights away and violate those rights. And I will stand up for people's rights. You'll see me standing up on issues where a lot of my Republican colleagues will not. If you follow the news of civil liberties issues, for example, civil rights issues, sometimes some of the things where I felt African Americans were treated unfairly. I see something in the news. I might speak up where my colleagues don't. There have been a lot of incidents like that over the years, and I think that makes me different than a lot of my colleagues. Yes.
Sharon from Bedford. Something we all need to do is be as aware and educated as we can be. And I wanted to bring to your attention a book that talks about our healthcare system. Why is Medicare so expensive? Why are drugs so expensive? Why is healthcare so expensive for everyone? That is defined as the industrial medical complex. And a book that describes that thoroughly and easily read is An American Sickness. An American Sickness, How Healthcare Became Big Business and How You Can Take It Back. And this is by Dr. Elizabeth Rosenthal. It's a new book. Willard Library has 8 copies. And she's an emergency room physician. She still works as an emergency room physician. She became an investigative journalist. has about 20 years' experience with that, and this book is part of that result. She worked with the New York Times. She thoroughly describes how the insurance companies, how the medical corporations, which we can easily see here with Bronson taking over everything they can get their hands on, but medical corporations, insurance companies, and the drug companies have a noose around everybody's neck, including the legislators. It's not going to be answered by the legislations of anybody. We have to start addressing this medical complex, this industrial medical complex itself. But read this book, Dr. Elizabeth Rosenthal, and we should probably start sitting in on the board meetings at Bronson, Borges, and other places to make our voices heard there. Thank you.
Question, yes.
My name's Kevin Britvick. I've lived in Battle Creek my whole life. And I just I wanted to come here tonight to thank you. I think you're a breath of fresh air in the Congress. I've been a libertarian-leaning liberal and a libertarian-leaning conservative, flip-flopping back and forth on certain issues my entire life, but I believe the Constitution is the answer and the Bill of Rights is what makes us different. And I want to thank you very much. I'm very grateful that you're our congressman and that I am not.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thanks. Appreciate that.
My name is Sarah Hubbard, and I live in Battle Creek. And you were talking about fundamental rights. Do you believe food and being able to eat is a fundamental right? 45% of food stamp recipients are children under the age of 18, which is approximately 20 million children. 9% were elderly over the age of 60. 10% are disabled adults. Nearly a third of households receiving food stamps had an income, meaning that someone had a job, but they were still eligible for SNAP because they weren't making enough money to get by. Do you think President Trump's plan to make big cuts to SNAP's funding is a good idea?
So, again, I think that social welfare should be handled at the state level, not at the federal level. I don't think that requiring someone else to pay for your food is a right. You obviously have the right to make decisions. You have the right to make decisions about your own food and your family's food, of course. But you don't have the right to ask someone else to demand food from someone else. You don't have that right, because that's just not how rights work. Otherwise, we can demand things from each other in this room. It's if someone demands something of someone else, that's considered theft. If someone walks up to someone else and says, "I demand you give me something," that's considered theft. If you go to the government and demand it, it doesn't change that. It doesn't change that fact. That cannot be considered a right. That doesn't mean that the government, particularly the state government, can't provide benefits or a safety net. But those have to be provided voluntarily through the will of the legislature. It's not provided as a right to those people. It's just not a right. No, it is what is cruel is to demand people give things of themselves. That is cruel. That's not right. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I got a couple quick questions. One of them is, a little while ago, you missed your first ever vote on the congressional floor, and I know things happen. It sounds like it was a misunderstanding. I'm not trying to shame you for that. There's conflicting reports. One of them said that you broke down crying. Is that true? Where's the true story of that?
That's a good question. No, so that's a great question. No, I did not. Yeah, sure. So if everyone wasn't clear, I've missed one vote in my whole life, actually, in Congress here. So
it's impressive. I do respect you for that. Okay, I just really sort of curious. But my real question is, so over the history of our country, education has become more and more important, and we've gone from, having primary school only to secondary school to it being compulsory. Would you consider ever making college level school free and nationalized the way we have for primary and secondary school?
No.
Can you see why?
I don't think it's appropriate to demand that people, again, spend another portion of their life going through another 4 years of college and then requiring all the taxpayers to pay for it. I don't think that that's the most efficient use of resources. I think that people should make decisions for their lives, and also people should pay for parts of their life. We are getting to the point where we're always asking everyone else to pay for everything we do. And that's not a good system. That will be very damaging to our country in the long run. And it's what has harmed so many countries around the world. We have a better system here. Again, my parents came here as immigrants. My dad is a refugee. They came from countries where this is the way it works, where everyone is asked to pay for everyone else. If your assumption is that because the government takes care of it, there won't be any corruption or evil, you're wrong. The government is full of people who will do bad things too. You don't want the government making these decisions. As soon as the government has the power to decide all of your well-being, how much food you get, how much health care you get, you've put a bunch of people in Washington who are not necessarily ethical people in charge of your lives. And that can become very dangerous. And what we see in places like Syria, where my mom is from, is the government requires you to be part of their system, do everything they want in order to get any benefits. You want to open a business? You better comply with everything the government says. You better not speak out against the government. You better not have the wrong friends. You better not have the wrong religion. You better not have the wrong last name. And we don't want that kind of system here. That is a very, very dangerous system. And the more we ask everyone to pay for everyone else, the more we move toward that system where we are all dependent on the government for everything. It's extracting the money from you, and then it's saying, you do our bidding or we don't give the money back. That's very dangerous.
Do you believe there should be no public education at all then? Where's the cutoff? Why is 12 years? Like, how do you determine that?
No. Look, again, as I said, I'm an incrementalist. We're not trying to change public education at the K through 12, but I do think that we should stop there. I don't think that we should go beyond that and go into college. I don't think we should go into the government paying for college. I think that's a mistake. I'm sorry.
I have a follow-up question.
Okay, if it's quick, because I got to get to them.
How do you talked about government, and I get what you're saying. I understand, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but I get what you're saying. Where does the imbalance of power come into play here? When you have 10% of 10 to 1% of the country that has 90% of the wealth, it's not just the government that has the power. The power in this country is taking away the rest of our rights. When the balance of power lies in the hands of 1%. So that's why your whole theory is very idealistic to me.
No, it's realistic. What's idealistic is thinking that the government will make everything better for you. What the government will do by having more power is make everyone poorer. Instead of some people being wealthier, everyone will be poorer. Well, we've had the freest country on the planet for many, many generations now. We're the freest country on the planet, and we are the wealthiest country, and there's a reason for that. It's because we're the freest. It's because we haven't had the government as involved in these things, and that's allowed us to become a relatively wealthy country. There's a reason that our per capita incomes are higher than other countries. If you look at Europe and compare Europe to the United States, there's a huge difference in how much money the typical American makes, the median income here. I'm not just talking about the average. The median income in the United States is much higher than it is in Europe or in other countries. So even if you take into account the cost of health insurance, we are still wealthier. So you don't want the government to have more and more control unless you want to put us in a situation where everyone becomes poorer. I think we got to wrap up pretty soon because they're going to boot us out of this room.
Thank you. My name is Angela. I'm actually from Grand Rapids. So I think I'm probably the only one from my generation in this class right now, but in this room right now. Talking about education, I just graduated from Western. Thanks. And I just wanted to get your opinion. So I was lucky enough to be born into a middle-class family who had a college fund set up for me. So thankfully I graduated without any debt, unlike many of my friends and peers. I have really close friends who are, just as talented as I am, worked just as hard throughout their college career, but now they're up in upwards of like $40,000 to $60,000 in debt. And I know that you want these loans to be more difficult, for people to get less easy, and I understand that. However, does that enter into an issue of where you're born into that? If you're born into middle class, lower class, does that start affecting whether you can, go to college to achieve like the American dream? Like I have friends who want to go research into PTSD. That takes a PhD. You have to, that costs a lot of money. They've got the talent and they've got the will, but they don't have the money. So are you, by saying that loans should be more difficult to get, are you saying that, if you're born into the lower class, tough luck?
So that's a great question. So the problem with the kind of suggestion you're making that everyone essentially should be made equal is that everyone ends up being worse off. You just have a country where everyone is worse off because there's no opportunity anymore. There's no opportunity. You take away all incentives for people to develop and grow in the country if you have everything handled by the government. You remove the market mechanism, and all of a sudden you have a country that stagnates and becomes more like Europe, which actually Europe has a lot of stagnation in its growth. It has problems with growing its economy. It has problems in growing its population because it has a system that is very top-down. And so there is no perfect system. There's no perfect system. What you're suggesting is the kind of system you're suggesting would still have these huge flaws where people go to college and they can't afford the loans and they're paying loans for the rest of their lives and they have a degree that isn't that worthwhile. And so they're still poor. They're still poor in that sense. If you have to pay back a couple $100,000 and you have a degree that can't get you a job, you're poor. Even if you went to college, you're poor. It happens a lot. It happens quite a bit.
In the 60s with a national defense loan. Would you have voted for that if you'd been in Congress way back then? The national student? Because I was a teacher, so I got to cancel 10% a year for 5 years. My friend taught in a low-income district. She got to cancel 15% a year for 5 years. Most of us had very little college, had very little debt. College was cheaper, but the National Student Defense Loan System to encourage people to go into teaching. You can do that now to encourage people to go into nursing, go into fields where we have shortages. And you think that would be bad?
I think it's bad to create a system where you are encouraging people to go into particular fields. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. They should. It should be based on their own decisions. Should be based on the market mechanism. It shouldn't be based on government, because the government is then making that decision for people. Sorry. I'll go. Yes, go ahead.
But if they can't afford it, how do they go? Like she said, that was one of, I have so many questions, I'm sorry. I can't even think straight. So I agree with what she said. And I think it's not about making student loans more accessible or less accessible. I can't talk, thank you. It's about making college more affordable. And how do you do that?
Well, but the reason college... The reason college costs are going up is because of these loans. That's why college costs are going up. Talk to a college administrator or a president and ask them why they raised their tuition. It's because the loans are coming in. When the students get the loans and there's money to come to college, they just raise their tuition. They increase it every year. So the rates, the college tuition rates continue to go up year after year. So we're not actually addressing the problem. And actually, if you look at the things, Think about the things government has been involved in, and you'll see that the prices tend to rise significantly, whether it's healthcare or student loans or any number of items. Those are the areas where you have the highest increases in costs. Yes, sir.
I had no intention of talking tonight on this particular subject, but I too graduated from Western in 1970. And the problem with student debt is student loans. There were student loans back then when I went to school, but they weren't like they are now. School was so much cheaper back then. I would be able to work a whole summer in the factories, work overtime, and save $3,000, which paid for all my school, all my housing, all my food, for a whole 2 semesters that I would go to school. They didn't have student loans like they have now. The problem is that money is so easy to get, loaned money. The government gives you money, banks give you money backed by the government. There's all this money, and so what happens? The schools charge you more for tuition, more for room and board, and the cost of an education is a lot more than it used to be.
I agree with you. So we're gonna have to wrap it up there. They're gonna need the room soon, and I was promised the media I'd talk to a couple of them before we get out of here. But I want to say thank you for coming today. Thank you for sharing your concerns. I am listening to your concerns. I appreciate your concerns. I don't, you know, we're not going to agree on everything, and obviously there's a lot of debate and disagreement in this room on all sides, but I promise you I will do my best to represent everyone in this community, and I take your concerns back to DC. Even the things that I don't agree with, I take those concerns back and talk to people about it. People mentioned this Medicaid issue. I brought that up many times, many times with my colleagues about Medicaid expansion. Brought it up many times that this would be a concern for our community. So even though I did vote for the bill, I did raise that as an issue and encourage them to do something different with it. But there's no way for me to have every bill written the way I want it. I have to make decisions based on what's in front of me. So I appreciate your being a part of this. I would say, you know, we have 2 senators who haven't done any town halls ever. And I would encourage U.S. senators, I would encourage you to ask them to do town halls. I've looked through it, and there's nothing in the public record of any town halls. They certainly haven't done any town halls this year. Senator Stabenow and Senator Peters, and I think that they should be spending time also in these communities, holding town halls, answering questions. I think it's important for all of our members of Congress, and so I encourage you to reach out to them too and encourage them to hold some town halls. So thank you.
AccessVision, your voice, your community.